Hi friends, hope you are all doing fine. So today I'm going to make a video on faculty positions and how to prepare for an interview. So essentially, let's recap this process. Let us assume that you have applied to a faculty position, you have prepared your CV, your research statement, teaching statements and any other documents. You have given your references and you have applied to this position. And what will typically happen is that the selection committee is going to wait for some time. It's going to collect all the different resumes and CVs, and then there is going to be a meeting and they are going to make a decision as to shortlist the candidates. So at this point they may or may not also ask the references. Sometimes they ask the references later, sometime before. That all depends on the selection committee and the university. So once they have figured out what is the short list, they are going to have something known as a screening interview. So they really do not want to call 10 or 15 people to the campus or the university and essentially interview them. They are likely to call 2-3 people at the most, 5 or 6. So they may actually interview 5, 10, even 15 people, because it's not very difficult to interview nowadays through Zoom, Team or Skype. So this is going to be the particular forum in which the screening interview is going to be done. And today I'm going to ask, or rather I'm going to tell you some of the questions which are going to be asked in this interview, which are likely to be asked in this interview. So what's going to happen is that there are going to be 3 to 5 faculty members. There is going to be the chair of the selection committee. Sometime the chairman is going to be there, sometime he's not going to be there. And some of these guys are going to be junior faculty, some are going to be senior faculty. So there is going to be a blend of people here. So this is the selection committee which has been created to peruse all these resumes and research statements and go through them. This is a very big task. They are probably flooded with this work, and so now they have concluded on a set of people and now they are going to shortlist further. So the first thing they are going to do is they are going to introduce themselves. So the chair of the selection committee is likely to say who he is, what is his field of expertise, and then they may go around the table and each of the professors will tell you as to what are their names and what is their primary research interest. Now, if you have done some background research on the web page, you will probably know this in advance, and so what you should do here is listen politely and properly, and also make a few points now and then to show that you are listening in an active manner. Now, once they have done this preliminary, they're going to ask you the first question, and that question is likely to be, what made you apply to this position? So again, this is a probing question and you have to give a professional reply to this question. So as far as possible, do not say you applied because of the geographical location, because your family lives there and so on. Those may be important to you, but what they are looking for is your professional answer. So here the right way to answer this question is to actually look at the ad which was put out by the university. What was the type of people they were seeking? And now you have a chance to exactly tell the selection committee that, look here, I have several of these skills which you have asked here. I have a background in some of these subjects you have asked here. So let's say the position is in nanomaterials or in quantum computing or in machine learning or in psychology. So you can exactly mention what is your background, and you essentially fit this position, and that is why you have applied here. So that is the important word here, fit. You need to try to prove your fit as the reply to this question. Now, the next question which is likely to happen is, tell us about your research. And this is a very typical question in a research university, and this is your chance to tell this committee as to what is your PhD research. If you have done a postdoc, what is your postdoc research? So in case you have done postdoc, you first summarize your postdoc research, then your PhD research. So here you have 5 to 10 minutes maximum to answer all these questions, because remember, the interview is likely to be for 30 minutes, sometime it can be 45 minutes and so on. So they actually have a list of candidates and they are trying to finish it. So do not go into a huge ramble about what you have done in your PhD and so on. Try to focus on the main aspects as to what was your PhD problem, what was the main discovery you made, and what were some of the methods you followed to actually make these discoveries. So this is the basic concept here. Now, once you have told the committee about your research, they are likely to ask you regarding your future plans. So that's going to be the question that tell us about your future research plans. And this is where you actually get to summarize your research statements in a paragraph or so. So essentially, whatever you have done in your PhD and postdoc, you may wish to continue one of those problems as a junior faculty, and you would like to have one or two new problems. So this is what they are looking for. So you should have figured out by now, if you have written the research statement, as to what is your goal here. Go through your research statement, have at least two problems lined out which you are going to do over the next 3 to 5 years. So now remember, these problems are also the genesis of whatever your PhD students or master students are going to do. So they are going to have a good idea as to what are the problems you are likely to give these students and whether this is a fit to the department. So that's also something you need to remember, that whatever problems you are quoting here should be problems which they are interested in, as you have predicted from the ad which has come out from the university. So this is sometimes important, that even if your PhD is not exactly in the same subdiscipline where they are looking for the person, you may actually be somebody who says that, okay, I have a background which is slightly different, but what I'm going to do once I get the job is I'm going to focus on this particular area, and I bring some tangential skills which are going to help me there. So that's one way to answer this question. Now, the next question is very important, and this is likely to be asked to you. Moment you mention what are your future research plan, they are going to ask you, how are you going to get funding? And this is very important, because the department and the university needs to know that they can provide you the funding support for the research plan you have developed. So in most cases, it's quite expensive to do research. You not only require computational facilities, which are relatively cheap, but very often you require experimental facilities. You may need to hire some project staff. You may need to buy some expensive equipment, maybe microscopes, maybe some kind of machines and so on. So this is again something which may be written out in your research statement, should be written out in your research statement if you are somebody who is seeking reasonable amount of money from the university. But also you should have a list of government bodies, private sector bodies which are likely to fund your research. So remember that most of research funding does come from the government, so you need to point out some of these institutions which are going to fund your research. So one of the ways to figure this out is to go through the web page of the department and see where the funding for some of the current research is coming from, and this is going to help you to mention some of these names. Now, once you have been asked this question and you have replied to it, the next question is likely to turn into collaboration in research. So they may ask you, how are you going to do your research? Are you going to work completely by yourself, or do you anticipate any collaboration with a faculty member in the department? So here you should always have one or two names you have thought about by going through the research profile in the department web page as to who you can collaborate with. And this is important because in many larger projects, it's very hard to get a single PI grant, and it may be easier if you hitch your wagon to a star, if you work with a more senior faculty who is very well connected, and maybe you can write a joint proposal with this person, and then maybe you can write a shorter proposal or a proposal for lesser money by yourself to one of the grants. So these are some things they look out for at this point. Anything like, I do not plan to collaborate with anybody, points you out as a lone ranger, which is not a good sign. Also, too much enthusiasm that you are only going to collaborate with people and do research points out that you may still be in the PhD or postdoc student mode and you may not have broken out for it, because one of the things in a faculty position is that you have to think about your own research and you have to create your own research path. So that is something very important in a typical faculty position they look for. So sometime collaboration is useful. For example, if you are a theoretician, collaborating with an experimentalist is a good idea. If you are a computational guy, working with somebody in experiment is a good idea, and so on. So again, keep that in mind, that look for complementary skill sets. Now, once they have finished with the research questions, they are likely to turn to teaching. And so one of the first questions you may get is, what is your teaching philosophy? This is a difficult question to answer for most PhDs and postdocs, but what you need to do here is basically lay out how you plan to teach a course. So by now you must have taken a lot of courses and you must have figured out as to which are the classes you liked and which you do not like. So for example, do you like teaching through whiteboard or blackboard, or do you prefer PowerPoint slides, and what are the justifications of each method? So remember that many traditional professors do not like the slide approach to teaching, because especially if you are teaching junior students, then you end up teaching too much material and the students are not able to digest that. So I would say that have some of these concepts thought about, whether you believe in lectures and quizzes at repeated times, how do you plan to give your midterms and exams. It's very important to focus a lot on projects, because nowadays most of the students actually learn much of the material from projects, and increasingly you need to defocus from any rote learning type of thinking and more focus on projects, and maybe even writing a term paper at the end of the course to develop their communication skills. So there are some more modern concepts in teaching, such as flipping the class and so on, but these are probably too far out for most selection committees. So I would suggest you don't go so far out at this stage. You try to be somebody who is a traditionalist but willing to try out new concepts, but not necessarily thinking yet of flipping the class. Those things are easier to do once you actually have the position and maybe you have become an associate professor or a full professor, and then you can experiment with your students. But when you are a junior faculty, it's not a good time to think of your students as prospective guinea pigs for your teaching theories. So at the end of this question, you may then get a question about what are the courses you are going to teach. And by now, if you have done research on the university, you should have figured out as to what are the key courses which are offered there, and you should have at least 2 courses lined up here. So typically one junior level course and one senior level course, which are part of your own research specialization. So it's always good to talk about courses which are part of your own research specialization, because that's what they are expecting to hear. Now, it may happen that when you join the university, they may actually give you something totally different to teach. So that is probably because they have a problem with getting a faculty to teach a certain class or something like that. But you don't want to think about those things now. You just focus on courses which you are good at, which you can teach at short notice and so on. Because remember that in case they call you for the final interview, they may actually ask you to teach a class on any of these courses you have mentioned. So don't mention more than 2 courses. I would say maximum 3 courses and so on. If it's a teaching school, you may be required to mention more courses, but that I will discuss in a further video. Now, once they have asked you these questions, they may ask you a question about when are you likely to join. So at this point, again, you need to revert back to the ad. What did they say in the ad? So they are likely to say it is in fall semester or in August semester or in December, sometime like that. And so you exactly should have your plan set out as the ad says, because that's what universities typically like. They like to take a long time to make any decision. So very likely, if you are having the screening interview sometime in January, then the interview may happen in March and your joining date may be September. So these are the time scales of a university. So having these things set out makes it easier for the committee to decide as to whether they should call you or not. Now, if you are a guy who is still doing a PhD, and you should clearly give out the details as to when you are going to finish the PhD and so on. So of course I would suggest do not apply to faculty positions unless you are pretty sure you are going to finish the PhD by the semester in which you are graduating. So have a discussion with your PhD guide and make sure you apply at the right time, because if not, then you are not only wasting your time, you are also wasting the time of the selection committee. Now what will happen is that they are going to interview a bunch of candidates like this, and then they are going to again meet together, and they're probably going to have a bigger meeting with the entire department faculty, and the selection committee and the department faculty are going to then further shortlist these into maybe 2 to 3 people who they are going to call for campus, because typically when candidates are called for campus, they have to be housed there. It may be 1 day or 2 day. They may have to be put up in a hotel. They may have to pay their airfare or their travel expenses. They may have to wine or dine them, at least dine them, if not wine them. And then they are going to again finally decide on this one candidate. So if you have been called in this screening type of interview, you are very lucky, because a huge amount of people actually apply for faculty position and very few are even called for this kind of a screening interview situation. And once you have been called, you can wait maybe a couple of weeks before you ask the chair of the selection committee about what is the future plan, and most likely they will tell you something. Sometime of course they may not respond. That's part of the university system, that they just move on. So it's not a good way of dealing with people, but unfortunately many universities deal with candidates like that. So you will just have to move on to the next job. So do not put all your eggs in one basket, and do not get too attached to any position. So that's very important to know. So I hope this video is useful to you. Again, a plane is flying. It happens every time I make a video. So I will see you sometime soon. See you then.